to solve the problems of the world or the problems of our relationships, we have to find ways that are outside our what we've learned to do. We have to find new ways. And this is part of what the psychedelics do for us is they loosen up the neural connections so we can think more creatively and find different networks and different connections and different ways of being. And this is the challenge for us, how to find other ways of being than the ones we've developed to survive.
Dr. Rachel Harris, I'm truly honored to have you on Men This Way. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
And I want to start by actually asking you about the island that you live on. I shared with you before we started recording that I read in the introduction to your book, Swimming in the Sacred, you bring us in, the reader, into a little bit of your island life. And I'm looking at you on this video screen, and I see that glorious tree behind you your I don't know if it's your backyard or front yard, but tell us a little bit about where you live, about that island, about your home.
Well, will this work if I turn? This is.
Oh, wow. That is beautiful. Yeah. That is, so I'm looking at there's a, is that a lake on the island, or is that a waterway?
It is actually a lake. Okay. And it's a freshwater, we call it a pond, but it's a mile long and it's 50 feet deep. So it's really a fjord. It's cut out of the granite and then
carved by glaciers.
Yeah. And volcano eruption, billions of years ago. And then across the street is the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm 7 miles off the coast of Maine.
Wow. I mean, it sounds, it looks beautiful, sounds rugged.
It is rugged. I mean, we're pretty far away from reasonable medical care. And we sometimes have trouble getting green vegetables and, food.
And you're there year round, even through the winters.
No. I'm a wimp. No.
Okay.
Let's not get carried away.
Okay. When do you bail out?
It gets cold and I leave. I bail out.
September, October, November?
I last until about right before Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And that's when my water pipes begin to freeze and I get kicked out. Yeah, this is really a summer cottage. And then I come back. I'm the first seasonal person who comes back mid-April.
Okay.
So I'm determined, but, I bail out.
You have limits. You told me before.
That's right. I have limits.
You have limits. Where do you go in the winters?
Well, I have a daughter in New York. So I go there and then, but I don't last long there. And I go to the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay. So you fall in New York, you autumn in New York, and then you
winter
in the Bay Area.
I'm retired
with the orcas. Well, I got to admit, I'm a little envious of where you get to live, at least through the summer season. It just looks beautiful. It's it's funny. The first thing my wife would wonder about is healthcare. Where's the hospital?
Oh, it's a 20-minute ride on a dirt road. A 40-minute boat ride and an hour drive.
See, that kind of excites me for some bizarre reason. It's probably why men don't live as long as women.
And then the bad news is you're at a small Maine community hospital, which is dangerous. So
right,
really shouldn't stop there. She's right to ask that question. That is the most difficult question.
Okay, well, I will not tell her just on the occasion that we ever get to visit. I'll tell her later.
Want to tell her she's correct. She's absolutely right.
Yeah, no, I will. She loves to hear. That's her favorite thing to hear. You're right.
Of course.
You're right. Yeah. Well, Rachel, we have a lot to talk about today. This is a subject that is as near and dear to my heart. I'm a former military officer. I was in the Air Force for 10 years. And ayahuasca, DMT, psilocybin mushrooms, those specifically really played a crucial role in helping me get my life back, my vitality back, my laughter back in so many ways. And so, this is a profound subject just for me personally. And I know a lot of our listeners, some of them, this will be brand new to them, and some will themselves also have had some experiences.
Do you have a lot of veterans in your audience? I probably should have asked this before, but
I have veterans in my audience. Yes.
Good.
I'm
Good.
certainly not a veteran-oriented podcast, but as a veteran, I attract veterans naturally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes.
Well, there's great concern in the psychedelic community for the well-being of veterans and the PTSD that many are suffering with.
And I'm very glad of that. That there's something. Even my experience was very painful. I didn't see combat, and yet being in the military alone, just what you go through to assimilate into the culture, and then how we're pretty much just kicked out. When our time's up, we're just ejected into civilian life. Most of us, many of us, and it's so disorienting on the entry and the exit. And then what happens in between is also profoundly, can be very wounding and painful, and for all kinds of reasons. So, I get emotional when I think about the struggles of veterans, because I know that we're not well cared for.
I'm sorry.
On
Yeah,
the other
and
side.
I agree.
So I also have been long excited for these psychedelic therapeutic practices to be available to men and women that experience, like me, and far worse than what I even experienced, because we're suffering in so many ways, even those that don't look like we're suffering.
Right.
It's weird. It is a bizarre thing to live in this sort of bardo between two worlds, not fully out of the military, but not fully feeling comfortable in our civilian communities. And it's just such a strange thing. So that makes me happy to hear, Rachel, that there's a lot of consideration going on there. And before we continue diving into all this, I want to help our listeners get to know you a bit better. And the way I'd like to do that is to ask you just to tell us a little bit about your background, and not just professional background, but some highlights, relevant highlights from your life, maybe your earlier life, but just something, some of the influences or events or people perhaps, but that played a significant role in crafting the woman that you have become, and perhaps inform your work as well. It's a small question, I know.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about my mother.
Great. Let's hear about Mom.
Who was not a great mother, but she was a very interesting person. And she was a member of the Rabbi's Bible study group, and she was a member of the Quaker meeting. She was on the board of the Quaker meeting. Oh, this is all at the same time. And she was a member of the UU, the Unitarian Universalist Church.
Oh, wow.
And when they voted about should we have a minister or not, my mother voted against it.
Interesting.
So this tells you a little bit about, the beginnings. And then, so I was always searching for what I didn't know exactly what, but I had mystical experiences, and I was trying to figure out what they were and how to get more. And, as a child, I mean, drugs were not even on anybody's almost anybody's radar that early. And so it was through reading and that sort of thing that I was finding some clues. And so following the clues, when I graduated from college at age 21, I went right into the Esalen residential program. And then I stayed there on the staff. This is in Big Sur, and there were plenty of drugs available. But to go back to my mother, she came to visit me, and she must have been in her 50s, which right now sounds kind of young to me. But at the time, I thought she was very old. And she came to Big Sur, and she said, if I were younger, I would stay. And that's the full circle. I mean, Carl Jung says, the biggest impact on a child's life is the unlived life of the parent. So my searching was the unlived life of my mother. She did very small searching, and I did much bigger searching.
So I'm curious, what impact did that have on you when she said to you, if I was younger, I would stay? What did your youthful ears hear? How did you receive that?
Oh my God, my mother's going to move in.
It was like,
I was so
interesting.
early 20s. That's not what
Uh-huh.
I wanted.
Uh,
But I realized, more seriously, I realized she was certainly a different generation and
mm,
didn't perceive
mm,
the opportunities that I took for granted.
mm,
And I have a lot of heartfelt uh, sadness for her and
mm.
for even older generations.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in my book, if you remember, I interviewed Kendra Smith, who's the wife of the widow of Houston Smith, who's a famous religion professor and did a lot to support psychedelic. And she's a personal friend. I know the family, and I interviewed her about a journey she and Houston did in 1960 with Timothy Leary.
Mm,
And at the end of the interview, I'm just hanging out with her and the family, and I say, "Did anybody else ever interview you about this? This is sort of a historic event.
mm,
This very early journey." And she said very sweetly, and she's a generation older than my mother, a little
mm,
bit. She's turning 100 this summer.
mm.
She said, "No, nobody ever seemed interested." And
Wow.
that's the story of that generation.
Wow.
Nobody was interested.
Yeah.
And so my heart goes out to her, of course, and then to my own mother for the limitations that she grew up with, and how she rose above many of them, but not all of them. Not enough to move to Big Sur in the late 60s.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been to Esalen as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I can really relate to my father gave me, he was also a very curious, very adventure seeker, experimented with a number of religions. I mean, when I was a kid, he took me to a Hopi reservation in Arizona. We met with a medicine man.
Oh my goodness.
I remember going to Ramadan dinner with him when he was, I don't know, flirting with Islam.
Wow. Ahead of his time.
Very much so. He was brewing kombucha in his kitchen back in the 80s.
Wow.
I was thinking, boy, Dad, if you would have just stayed with the kombucha thing, I'd be the kombucha heir. I could be the heir to the kombucha fortune. But it was just some weird guy brewing mushrooms in his weird mushroom juice in his kitchen. It was gross. It wasn't.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Right. But could you say that again about the unfinished business of our parents?
Yeah, Carl Jung says that the biggest influence on a person's life is the unlived life. That's the more accurate. The unlived life of the parent.
Mm.
So, do you have kombucha in your kitchen?
I do drink kombucha. Yes.
There you go.
I love that. Well, let's set the table a little bit, because again, some of my listeners will not really be familiar with this world, and so what are we really talking about? There's a few terms I want to make sure we're clear about. What are we really talking about when we talk about like plant medicines, psychedelics? Also, what does entheogens mean?
Entheogens.
Entheogens, and what are we not talking about?
Well, we're talking about a range of medicines that are non-addictive, for one thing. So that even though they're classified by the federal government as, very dangerous, they are in fact not. That classification is a leftover from President Nixon, who started the war on drugs and labeled these drugs as very dangerous, when in fact they're not in an addictive way dangerous. So they're mind expanding or mind manifesting. In other words, they sort of, from a psychological point of view, they open the doors to the unconscious. Mm-hmm. So that's the expansion and opening.
And when we use this word entheogen, what are we talking about? What does that mean?
That really captures the sacred quality of these medicines, and that it reveals the God within. So that's entheogen, is the sacred, the mystery, capital M, that's within each of us. So that sort of opens the door to that kind of a perennial philosophy of religion. So these are quite different drugs than cocaine or opioids. I mean, it's a totally different class. It's every drug has side effects, certainly, and some risks, even Tylenol. So things that we wouldn't, so there's always some risk. But these drugs have a long cultural history of being used in sacred ways. So maybe a couple of months ago, there was a New York Times article about a burial cave on an island off the coast of Spain where they found some bodies, some, long dead skeletons, remains from 3,000 years ago. And there was enough hair left that they could do a hair analysis. And they found psychotropic medicines, drugs like these plant medicines, in the hair of the people who were buried in this cave. And they were able to analyze that the people had been using these medicines for the last year of their life. They could tell from the length of the hair how much was present. So these medicines have been used ritualistically and as part of a sacred way of being in the world for thousands and thousands of years. I don't think we really know exactly how many thousands.
Yeah, we do seem to be living in a bit of a delusional bubble here in the modern age, thinking that these. I'm also fascinated by that word medicines. These medicines. Me and my closest friends, we will at times we'll get together and we'll do what we call medicine journey, which usually means we'll take usually just psilocybin. Really psilocybin, maybe MDMA, right? Or sassafras. Yeah. We don't really do ayahuasca together. I've kind of left those days behind. I feel complete with ayahuasca for the time being. But we use that word medicine a lot. And sometimes I've wondered, are we just a bunch of guys getting together and doing drugs, or are we just using this word medicines? But we do it in a thoughtful way. It's not a party for us. It is an intentional practice. It is an intentional, we don't do it and then go out to the club. We rent a home and we're together and we're contained and we'll dance, and it's a bunch of guys. There's not even women that are present when we do this typically, and we're connecting with each other, connecting with ourselves. Like, I'm just curious, the word medicines, is that?
Well, let me just say, lucky you.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Yeah, to
have kindred spirits and to be together. Yeah, and I would say this is a sacred way of using the medicines, and what's different about these medicines, these sacred entheogens, that's a little redundant, but is that they are used in the underground, if I could say, over a whole lifetime. And I like to give the example of Albert Hoffman, who synthesized LSD. He lived to the ripe old age of 102. He took his last acid trip at age 97. So I don't even aspire to this. This is so beyond me. But it gives you the clue of the use of these psychedelics over a whole lifetime. We're at different stages of life and different initiations throughout our lives, different times, maybe crises. And so people turn to these medicines for guidance and inspiration. Yeah. And that's very different at age 30 from age 60 or 97. I mean, I can't even imagine, but it's the use of them over time that I think is very unique about these medicines.
Having experimented with different really plant medicines, I've never tried cocaine. I've never done opioids. I've never been into those.
Right. Those are whole different classes. Are you actually using leaves or bark from the sassafras tree?
I've only tried sassafras once, and it was in liquid form. And that was actually not too long ago. But I've marijuana is not a good medicine for me. It takes me somewhere that I don't enjoy going. It takes me out of the moment. Whereas psilocybin mushrooms, that's medicine for me. I'm married now to a deeply feeling woman, a deeply sensitive and feeling woman. It's what I love about her, and it's what overwhelms me about her also at times, you know. I mean, me being a boy coming from a military background, you know, my capacity to feel my feelings has been limited in many ways. And I'm working on expanding that capacity with all different types of, but see, in a moment, I want to explore sort of the intersection of science and mysticism, but I want to just share kind of what happens for me is because I want to ask you about more the physiology, what's actually going on. But so what happens when I take mushrooms, for example, and you know, my wife and I, she won't take them. She's just she's too sensitive. It just doesn't, it doesn't really work for her.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay, great.
Down the road a little. No,
okay,
you go.
We'll put a pin in that and come back to it. Great. I would love to. When I take them, wow, I come into my body. I feel my breath. I feel something happens, and I understand my wife. I connect with her on a level that is almost unavailable to me outside of that experience. I mean, we're doing great. We connect. We have fun. We laugh a lot. You know, we're in a good place, and we're going through some hard things in our lives. But she and I are good. And when I do a mushroom journey in her presence, just her and I, you know, afterwards she'll say, Bryan, I wish you could take mushrooms for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Because she loves.
Anyways, I wonder what she means.
She loves how I feel myself and how I feel her.
Right.
In that experience. So let's talk a little bit just physiologically, what is going on here? And I don't know if there's like common threads of physiological change or shift through all plant medicines, or if each of them have their own different, you know, chemical signatures.
Well, certainly there's similarities across these medicines, and you'd be wise to speak to a chemist about it instead of a psychologist. But there are similarities, and each medicine has its own signature. Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting for me to hear you say, "Well, I've worked with ayahuasca, and I'm finished with that for now." And you're really talking with kind of love for psilocybin, for mushrooms.
Yeah.
So you know, there's this phrase, well, what's your people actually ask me upon meeting me, what's your medicine? You know,
okay.
But it's obvious you have a relationship with the mushrooms.
Yes.
You know, the love.
Very much so.
The love comes through, the gratitude comes through. And so that's part of what's, you know, nobody talks about Tylenol that way.
No, that's true.
There's something unique. Yeah, there's something unique about this way of working with the medicines, that a relationship develops. And that's an important part of what distinguishes these medicines as well. And that quality of relationship surfaces even when you're not under the influence, because it came up just a few minutes ago when you were talking about psilocybin journeys. So it's a relationship that goes beyond the influence of the drug in the plant.
You know what? This is interesting. So there's a common experience I've seen with military veterans, because I'm a vet, and the first time I did mushrooms, this thing happened, and I had the great honor to help a friend of mine who'd been in the military for 20 plus years and only recently got out do mushrooms for the first time. He did them with me in my home, and something really fascinating happened. So one of the reasons I have such a love for psilocybin is the first time I did it, Rachel, I laughed from a place in my body that I had never experienced laughter. Like I didn't even know I could laugh from that place. Like it was a deep, full-bodied, full soul laughter that I don't know if maybe when I was a kid, I laughed that way, but life just beat that out of me. And the military certainly, you know, a lot of guys can relate to not being able to cry. But many of us don't realize that we're not really fully laughing either. We're not fully experiencing our joy.
Yeah.
We don't notice that part. Our joy is also cut off at the neck. And this happened to my friend as well. He had a laughter erupted him. And he shared with me after, he's like, Bryan, I don't even feel like that was my laughter. Oh. And I was like, my brother,
that was his own laughter.
That came from your body. That's yours. Mm-hmm. Right. So again, maybe just high picture, even just psilocybin, big picture, what's happening in our bodies, our brains, just big picture, what you know
Well,
about
the
that.
big picture is that the default mode network in the brain is quieted. And that's the network in the brain that maintains our sense of self, our life story. This happened to me when I was 10 years old. It sort of maintains our identity and our ego.
Yeah.
And that includes all the defenses that we've built up in our personality, in our psyche, and in our bodies. And so if the DMN, the default mode network is quieted, then our defenses are lowered and we're more open. We're less attached to one constricted way of being. And so we're more open. And so that allows this mind manifestation, this openness to the unconscious, to a childhood that we've probably forgotten or not been in touch with. It opens the doors. And so it's unpredictable what's going to emerge. And so it's wonderful. That's great fun when it's laughter. And sometimes it's trauma, and sometimes it's a past life, and sometimes it's talking to someone who's died. There's really no way of predicting or controlling what's going to emerge.
Well, that's interesting, and maybe we could circle back to my wife, because we did do mushrooms early in our relationship, and the first time she had a wondrous experience, and the second time she didn't. The second time some old pain came through, old trauma came through, and we were not in the awareness of the importance of integrating afterwards. I think that's probably one of the great, I don't know, errors or mistakes. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's the thing that people overlook a lot when we're doing these kinds of journeys, is we don't allow for integration time or practice or support.
Can I just ask, did a trauma emerge that she hadn't known about? Was it a surprise?
It was a surprise. It was suppressed largely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So integration is not enough when those floodgates open. At that point, that really calls for therapy.
Yeah.
In the university study teams, the integration sessions are 3, at the max 4 or 5. I mean, a lot of the subjects say I needed more integration sessions, but what they really mean is something came up that I need to work on. I need therapy for this.
Yeah.
And so when people have a sort of a recovered memory of trauma and things are opened up that they didn't even know about, that really requires working through, which is more than it. I mean, I've been a therapist all my life. So of course I believe in therapy. I'm a proponent of therapy. And so that requires more. And so integration, it isn't enough when that happens.
Yeah. Well,
the other thing I want to talk about, and of course we never know when something's going to emerge. And that's pretty scary to go back there and say, I'm going to do more of this.
Yeah.
You really need a lot of support to work that through, or else sometimes people are just re-traumatizing themselves with the same traumatic experience and ceremony after ceremony, and that's not working anything through. But I want to just pause a minute and talk about dose, because some people who are very sensitive require a smaller dose. They do better with a smaller dose. They're just more comfortable. Things are just more manageable. It's not as overwhelming. And the American culture is very, I call it the cowboy dose. I think it's called a heroic dose. More is better. More is better is the philosophy of our culture. And for some people who are very sensitive, that's really a mistake and can turn them off to the whole thing. So, and it's, I warn couples who are going skiing, downhill skiing, for the woman, don't try and keep up with your husband. More women, break a leg trying to do a hill that they're not ready for to keep up with the man in their life. And it's sort of the same thing. Yeah. Medicine.
Well, my wife is a therapist as well, and she's been going to therapy for years, and so she I think that experience would have been far more traumatic for her had she not had
Yeah.
therapeutic support after. So I 1,000%
So she had that
concur.
working through. Did that turn
Yes.
her off of mushrooms completely? Was that the last of it?
That was the last of it. And, but my wife is her whole system, her physical system is very sensitive to any kind of medicine, even Tylenol, even antibiotics, even like anything that she puts in her body.
Right.
Her skin can break out into rashes. And I mean, she just has a very sensitive constitution. And so, we've decided for now anyway, we may work with a therapist at some point to do some kind of MDMA journey in a therapeutic context. She'd feel safe doing that. But for now, our journeys are limited to, I'll do mushrooms, and I don't even do a heroic cowboy. I like cowboy dose. That's fun. I really don't do cowboy doses anymore.
Maybe I should say rodeo dose or something.
Rodeo dose. It's fun. Yeah. I'm just wanting to connect with my wife, connect with my body, have this, so much magic has come from a lot, this podcast, honestly, this work that I do with men, a lot of it has come out of weekends of spent with other men doing medicine ceremonies and allowing inspiration to come through. So this has changed my life.
I hear it.
So many ways. And I'm curious. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the science part, shutting down the default mode network. I mean, it makes sense that, laughter can erupt because there's no judgment around it. There's less
judgment.
It's allowed to just express through me. And, but I've had, my DMT experiences have also been, I've had two different kinds of DMT experiences, right? There's two different kinds of DMT. There's, I don't know, regular DMT. I don't know. Is that what we call it? Regular DMT?
I'm not sure.
And then there's the 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah.
Right. And those have long chemical names that they stand for. But I've done both. DMT, regular DMT, I wasn't that interested in. I saw a bunch of weird things. It was like someone turned my brain inside out for a few minutes and I saw all these weird shapes and things. And I wasn't that, interesting, but so what? Whereas 5-MeO, long story short, I shattered. It was I became one with the universe, as they say, in extreme shorthand. A lot changed for me after that experience. But the question that I have for you, Rachel, is what do you believe? What do you know or believe are these sources of these phenomenon, whether it's, seeing your brain turned inside out from regular DMT or shattering and having a mystical experience from 5-MeO or the vision experiences of ayahuasca or for me, like the connecting experiences of like now we're in the mystical realm. What is that? What's happening? Where's that coming from? Again, I know these are small questions. With
small
easy
questions.
answers.
Are you kidding? This is the biggest question. And nobody can answer that. No, this is the big question. And quest. This has been a quest through centuries for this kind of experience. And then the downside of it is the women I interviewed for the book who had been working underground for a long time, they said, well, now people are calling and saying, I'd like to come in and do a journey because I'd like a mystical experience. Well, you can't just order it up. It's not like a diner.
Right. Uh-huh.
So there's been, I think, in a way, too much emphasis on the mystical experience as it's defined by the questionnaire, the ego dissolution and the sense of unity. It's wonderful. And you know what? People have these experiences all the time. That's the other thing that doesn't get talked about enough is that there's some look up. There's a paperback book based on research called Quantum Change. And it was based on a study where psychologists put an ad in the paper asking for people who had had a mystical experience. This was in the 1990s. And people responded. This had nothing to do with psychedelics or entheogens. It's completely spontaneous experiences. And people changed their lives as a result of these experiences. Their priorities changed. You'll recognize this. Evidently, this was part of your life. Their priorities in life changed. Their values changed. Many of them changed their occupations. They worked for nonprofits. They were more environmentally active. I mean, it's a standard list. And William James talked about this in the turn of the 1900s as a conversion experience. It changes a person's whole life. But we don't really know the mechanics of it.
That's a question that I wanted to explore with you. Is the transformational potential for these medicines? You spoke about in your book, you shared in your book, Swimming in the Sacred. One of the things that really struck you about the women that you interviewed was there's a beautiful passage in which you talk about them. Like you get, I think this is a quote. Yeah, I called out. I get a sense that their physical bodies are less solid than the rest of us. They've thinned not only the veil separating worlds, but the corporality of material existence. Like there was a sense that these women who had been, and to be clear for our listeners, Rachel's book, Swimming in the Sacred, subtitle Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. It's a book in which you, Rachel, you spent time interviewing how many women?
There were 15 in the core group who met the criteria, but I interviewed a bunch of other women and other people around the whole process, around the whole underground community.
Who'd been doing this work for decades.
Yes.
Decades. I mean, in some cases, more than half a century.
Yes.
Some of these women.
These are the elders.
Right, the elders. And so there was you talk about, I went into my own psychedelic searching, like ayahuasca. It's like, I wanted to learn, like, show me something, life, show me what's behind the veil. It's like, give me the Matrix pill. And, my first ayahuasca trip was a major disappointment, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me, but that's another story for another time.
It's tough.
Yeah. She played a little hard to get, which I appreciate. And yet lifelong learning with entheogens is not about learning content, learning information, but rather about transformation.
So let me read some quotes from the women, because that
Great,
really
please.
Does them justice. There's a bigger message coming from the medicine, larger than individual psychological healing. So the women look for transformational changes that you make in life after the ceremony. So the research teams are looking at a reduction of symptoms. Mm-hmm. The underground women are looking for a new life. What are you doing to bring back to the community? And so it's a much bigger picture. So here's another way to say it. We are responsible for our intentions and our choices, responsible to ourselves and to humanity. So you get a sense of the way these women even hold the medicines is much bigger. It's they're looking for transformation so that you come back from the journey and give to the community.
Well, I'm getting chills, Rachel, hearing you share this, because that stood out for me as well in your book, that you shared that you had an experience. I forget the name of the teacher earlier in your life who was teaching self-responsibility. I can't remember the name.
It's Gestalt therapy. It was Fritz Perl.
Fritz Perl, that's it. Gestalt. So he was teaching self-responsibility. These women that you interviewed, or at least there was one particular woman, Medrith.
One woman.
Medrith.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. The purpose of medicine work, you asked her, is the bottom line all about taking responsibility for ourselves, for our lives? Is that what it's all about? And she says, yes, we are responsible for our intentions and our choices, responsible to ourselves and to humanity. And you drew this beautiful distinction. I mean, it lights me up, because I've also been myself. I've been down that path of, okay, yes, I have absolute responsibility for my life. And also what comes along with that is, so do you, motherfucker out there. You also have responsibility for your life. And don't you dare, this sort of comes with that fuck you energy of, don't you dare make me responsible for your feelings kind of thing. I mean, it even shows up in popular culture these days. There's this whole fuck your feelings movement, which is so weird, but it's there. And it's men and women alike, have wear t-shirts that say those. So why is it why do you think, you chose to interview women specifically? I know there are men that have done these journeys, but
Oh
you
yeah, there are
focused
men
on
working
women.
underground.
You focused on women. What is that? Why do you think women have been, I don't know, I guess I'll just ask you, why did you focus on women? What's special are they holding that maybe in the research community, it's more kind of, man or masculine dominated, masculine, outcome focused. It's all about, uh, you said symptom reduction, problem. Let's get rid of the problems, basically. Whereas what I heard you say is like women. It's like, where's life now flourishing and where it wasn't before? Take us into that a little bit, Rachel, please.
Yeah, I felt that the women had more sensitive, ongoing relationship with the plant spirits, and the plant spirits kind of dominate the sacred medicines, the psilocybin and peyote and mescaline and ayahuasca for sure. That they really know in their bones about the relationship with the medicine, with the plant teachers, and that's is certainly very different from the research teams, which are male dominated still, and I mean, how can an academic research team talk about plant spirits? I understand the dilemma.
Right.
And but it's an important part of the way the indigenous communities hold the medicines. So it really is about these are not considered drugs. It's you drink the medicine, you work with the plant to develop a relationship with the plant that then is helpful to you and becomes a plant teacher in your life and in your psyche. And I have a dear friend who's a Zurich trained Jungian analyst. So he's been in therapy, he's been analyzed. This is sort of, this is real high level training. And he's been working with a shaman in Peru, a Shipipo shaman, for 6 years now. And he said, he's in a therapy session and he'll get a vision of a snake or something happening. And all of a sudden he sees into other worlds that are present in the other dimensions that are present in the dimension we're in. And he says when that happens, something shifts in the therapeutic process. And the client will open up in a different way. It will change the whole direction of the therapy. So there's this sense of working with unseen others that was bigger in the women's lives than in the men I interviewed underground.
Well, I think that really stood out to me too, because as I said, I went through that journey. I went through that, and I see this a lot of men in that hyper independent mindset. Okay, yes, I am master of my own fate, which again, you're master of your own fate. So there's no relationship there, really.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah.
There's no relating in that. And a lot of men idealize that place. It's safe, I suppose. I don't know but whereas the gifts that I'm understanding, that you speak to this in your book, you write about it, you're sharing about it now. Like women seem to be more
relational would be the term.
Relational, right?
Yeah.
And the conclusions, the gifts that they're bringing back from these journeys bring us more into relationship with nature, with each other,
right?
And I've made my way for the last 10 years or so as a relationship coach. I've worked with couples and men and women, and boy, if my biggest lesson and also my own relationships and in what I teach is the word connection, helping people to create connection.
And so a theme through our conversation has been your relationship with the mushrooms.
Yes.
That's what's come through this conversation.
Yes.
So
it is, I have a connection to mushrooms. That is sacred for me.
It's sacred. And I want to be clear, it is not dependent on your being under the influence. It's present.
Say more about what you mean by that.
It's not a drug side effect.
Right.
It lives in you.
Yes.
Beyond the ceremony.
Absolutely. I laugh I have a laughter now that I do not take for granted every day.
Yeah.
Every day I laugh from that place that I first discovered under mushrooms. And I'll do only a few mushroom journeys in a year.
Right.
It's not something I need to do very
And
often.
that's how the medicine is used underground. It's used very periodically, or there's a fine tuning or a different situation.
Yeah.
And you feel called. So it's something that goes way beyond the ceremony, way beyond the drug effect, what would be studied as the drug effect. It goes way beyond.
And even like ayahuasca, although I feel complete with that experience. I did it maybe 25 times over a period of about a year or 2 years. And
That's
boy,
a lot.
I went for it. This was, again, in the few years after the military. So I was hurting and desperate. But I felt complete. And I know that there may be a time when I'll be called back into a ceremony. It'll be very circumstantial, the context will be right. Like everything will just be right. And I'll listen. But I'm curious. I want to come back to this. We were talking a bit about the research world of psychedelics and entheogens and what do you, I'm very excited about that, as many people are, that's happening.
Absolutely. Right.
And though you speak to, there's a risk that something may be lost in the current movement to bring psychedelic work into the realm of like regulated therapeutic care. What is that risk of being lost?
Well, for one thing, the sense of working with the medicines over time is lost, because the research is all focused on a cost-effective approach. So that means the least amount of therapy, the shortest term of treatment. So it's a period of about 3 months. So you can see right there is the contrast when you talk about, I work with the mushrooms a few times a year over time. It's and I feel the relationship beyond the ceremony. You get a sense of, this is over time, something is developing. And the research teams are looking at a very specific intervention for specific symptoms. So as much as they try and be sacred, they have a sacred approach, it's very treatment oriented and cost effective. And it has to be the question is, how are we going to scale up to meet the incredible mental health need that's present in the country these days? And so it has to be very treatment oriented, but something is really lost in that process. And part of what's lost is the quality of, how are you changed over time as a result of this ongoing work with any of the entheogens that, the one that really speaks to you. How do you evolve? And, as I look back on the writing of this book, I wasn't clear about it when it was happening, but, once it was over and the book was being printed, I had the kind of space to say, I'm different as a result of all these interviews, not as a result of any journeys. I mean, I did a couple, but it wasn't because of them exactly. It was the ongoing contact with these women who live so close to this other world, who have thin veils.
Yeah.
And I think that is still unfolding in me. And I finished the writing of the book over a year ago. But I think the extent to which I've been impacted and my belief system is changing. And it's not from a big mystical experience. It's from this ongoing contact with this other world that has become more alive for me, as it is for the women I interviewed. So there's this sense of, there was almost like a contact high. There is a contagious impact on my psyche that was just somehow more opened up. So there are these subtle aspects of working with the sacred medicines that are just plain neglected.
Yeah, wow, it makes sense. Like, as you were sharing that, I see this vision of a very disconnected society, disconnected from nature, disconnected from our bodies, dipping our toes into sacred waters, just dipping our toes and going, oh, that feels nice. I'm refreshed now. Taking the toe back out and then going back into our disconnected world. Like, I'm good. I'm fixed. I'm okay now.
Yeah.
And whereas my relationship with my wife is deeply served by my ongoing practice of psilocybin mushroom usage. I've experimented with microdosing, even not diligently, not very disciplined, but from time to time. But
Say that phrase again. You used a great phrase. Your ongoing practice.
My ongoing practice of mushroom.
Okay.
I don't know exactly.
Of working with
psilocybin. Yeah, it's a practice.
Yeah, it's a practice.
It is a practice.
There's a chapter in the book. As a psychologist and a therapist, I felt I had the right to name the chapter. What the hell is integration anyway? Because we're all talking about it. There's no definition. Nobody really knows. Am I talking about the same thing someone else is talking about? But what I really want to talk about is the ongoing practice of working with the medicines. And that's what I keep coming back to. And that's what you're describing. And that's when the relationship grows. And when people are training with an indigenous shaman, it's the development of these relationships with the plants that is the practice of the training. You want to be a shaman? You work for years with different plants. It's a process that goes over 6 or 7 years just to get started.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's all in those relationships.
Yeah.
So it's that ongoing practice.
Which leads me to another question is, what do you have a vision? I mean, how might our society safely and effectively incorporate entheogenic psychedelic practices more broadly?
It's not so much a vision as this is how I console myself when I worry at night, when I lose sleep over this question.
Okay.
Because we are such a young culture and we don't have the rituals and the sacred place in the culture for these women to have a legitimate place above ground. They still don't, or for the medicines to have a sacred place in our larger community. We just have not evolved to that point. And so here's how I console myself. I say, well, when someone decides they want to go to therapy, there's a whole range of therapists to choose from. And so I think it's going to be the same thing. When someone decides they want to explore with a psychedelic medicine, there's a whole range of different ways of doing it. And people seem to find the place where they fit. And I hope it will be like that, that the medicines will be available in many different safe ways, so that people can find a way that works for them.
What would you recommend to somebody who's listening now? They don't have an avenue or an inroad or a connection, or they don't know where to go. What would you suggest to someone who's like, wow, this sounds fascinating. I'd love to try mushrooms. I'd love to experience ayahuasca. Because you alluded to it a moment ago. There are a lot of people who just took some ayahuasca and now they've set up shop. They're a shaman.
Yeah,
and they're leading ceremonies.
This is what keeps me up at night. Don't go to them.
And so, how could someone safely begin that journey? What would you recommend?
Well, there's a search involved, isn't there? It's sort of like the teacher will appear. Most large community cities have a psychedelic society. So I say, well, go to those meetings, you'll meet people, you'll get lots of options. And then you have to, find out what the options are really. Don't go to anybody who does not do a complete medical screening. Okay. There should be an intake that asks a lot of medical questions, and the person leading or sitting should have access to a medical doctor for consultation, or a nurse practitioner, someone who's medically trained to deal with the questions about diagnoses and medications. Because for some people, they shouldn't sit and do a ceremony; they should be excluded. The other thing to ask is what music is going to be used. And how much is the person doing the ceremony? Are they singing themselves? Which, if it's an ayahuasca ceremony, were they trained over many years to learn how to sing the Icaros? Because the Icaros are the medicine. The plant medicine, the ayahuasca, opens you up, but the healing is through the Icaros.
The songs that they sing.
The songs. So
Yeah.
are they going to play recorded songs? That's not quite the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just acknowledge I participated in an ayahuasca ceremony in the Everglades many moons ago. And
How were the
overnight,
mosquitoes?
they were fine. I don't remember them. So that was probably a good thing.
That's good.
But what I do remember is somebody busted out an acoustic guitar, an hour or two into the ceremony and started playing 1970s like Eric Clapton songs. And I was like, no, this is not, this is a no. And so, the music, the sounds, that was such vital importance.
Yes.
So I love that
It's
you
vitally
point that out.
important. One of the women said, one of the women underground elders I interviewed said, you have a right to ask who authorized you to serve this medicine. So what's your lineage?
Mm-hmm.
How many years have you been working with this medicine? Who trained you basically? Who did you apprentice with? How did you come to this? And some of the conversations that came up, I think the women always, a few of the underground women thought everyone who was a therapist had their own therapy. And I said, no, there's no requirement. You can be licensed as a therapist without having had your own therapy. And she was just horrified. How could that be? Anybody working with these medicines should have done their own work with the medicines, really know the territory, know the medicine well at lots of different doses. So that takes time to do that.
Yeah.
And I know that the current psychedelic therapists, they can't spend 6 years just getting to know the medicines. They're needed now. So I know this is not possible, but they can be working on it.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, when they come to it, as I did, through I guess it's the only way you can come to it these days, through underground channels,
right?
But not through no really skilled gatekeepers. I think the most lineaged practice I did in the early days was I sat with the Santo Daime Church in Miami for many months. Santo Daime is the religion of ayahuasca, as I like to say. And that, as much as I didn't want any structure, because I was coming out of the military and I was like, structure be damned.
Oh, no, they're highly structured.
It was incredibly structured, and I resisted it at first, but it actually helped me have the most profound experiences with ayahuasca versus the opposite, the Everglades, Eric Clapton song ceremony of ayahuasca. That was
right. So you have to ask, well, where the hell was the person leading that ceremony that allowed that? That's not. So Santo Daime is a safe way. You're in a church structure, so it's very structured. It is, at least you're safe.
Yeah, and I like that you speak to something that I think a lot of newbies to the psychedelic, and maybe even some long-time practitioners, but we get this euphoric sense of everybody in the world needs to do this. If only Congress, everyone in Congress would take mushrooms, all our problems would be solved. And it's just not true.
Now you're speaking to my generation, right? The late 60s. So these are the baby boomers. What a mess we've made of the world. So that should be obvious that this is not true.
Right. And so I think approaching it with reverence, I love that you spoke. It is a search. I remember, when I first was drawn to ayahuasca, it was a question I just put into the universe. It was like, okay, find me. Where are you? And it did not take long. Right? And this was almost 20 years ago. So it wasn't today it seems like it's everywhere, but 20 years ago it was very hard to find.
Right.
But as soon as I started speaking,
know what it was. Yeah.
As soon as I started speaking it into my wishing, my desiring, she found me very quickly.
Yeah.
And, I had to go through some, as I've shared, ridiculous experiences and to come to a place where I feel in right relationship to psilocybin specifically. So anyway, Rachel, I could talk to you for hours more.
Well, this has been fun.
This is so delightful, and I'm so enthralled, and it's such a big subject. And I do have just a few more questions for you. But I want to just remind everybody, your book is Swimming in the Sacred: Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. And people can find that anywhere online, essentially.
Oh,
right
yes.
now?
Well, it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
And that's the website. The website is www.swimminginthesacred.com.
And
So
I'll put links to that in the show notes. And, but just a few more questions.
Sure.
I'll say this tragically often, we live in a world of many olders, but few elders. And Rachel, I experience you as a wise elder, a true elder. And so it's truly for me, again, tragically rare privilege and honor to be able to spend some time with you and sit with you and be in conversation with you. And that's why I created this podcast, was to give men who don't have access to wise elders at least we can hear conversations, wisdom conversations. That's the ambition anyway of this podcast. And I'm delighted to have spent this time with you. Just a few more questions that I would ask of an elder. And, these are troubling times. I'm generally an optimist. I've been an optimist my whole life. And boy, I don't know if it's just a product of getting older. We just get more scared. I don't know.
Scared, yeah.
Is that a thing? I don't know. But these seem to be troubling times. And I'm curious when you look into our future, like, do you have hope for humanity, for the world? Do you some of the people I've asked, like some elders they look and they'll say, we are heading into a great dark and unknown, a period of initiation, perhaps. I mean, what do you see, Rachel?
I honestly don't know, but I worry for the sake of my grandson, of course. I have a 3.5-year-old grandson. So what will the world be like when he's even just 30 years old? I think it is a challenging, frightening time, a worrisome time. And I don't know how to go from here to where we want to be. I don't know how is this shift going to happen that we end up in a better place. I don't know. So all I know how to do is my little job. And I rise to that occasion. I mean, I do my little job. That's all I know to do. Lots of people have much bigger jobs.
Yeah.
So I think to know what we're called to do and to rise to do that, whatever it is, that's the only thing I know to do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It reminds me of something my grandmother said years ago before she died, that incidentally I heard the Dalai Lama say not long after. Wow. She said, this was was it George Bush and what's his name? The vice president, Al Gore, when Bush and Gore were fighting over the presidency.
Yeah.
Remember my grandma said, not everybody can do big things in this world, but everybody can be kind.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wow, Grandma, that's rich. That's deep. That's profound. And it's not something typically I hear said by men, but yet.
That's true. But the Dalai Lama does say it.
And he is a man, and he did say it. And I heard him say that. And so it's just such a good reminder to me as well. Like this is my part. I'm doing my part.
I get a sense that that's true for you.
So thank you for that. Just last question. Maybe it's superfluous. I'm not sure. But last question. This is a podcast for men. Again, we have a lot of women listeners. But I like to leave off with a question. Like, what do you think, Rachel, is the biggest challenge facing men, particularly today? And what wisdom might you offer in the face of it?
Well, I don't think it's just men. So I would say the biggest challenge facing all of us is our egos. And how do we work with, and we need our egos to grow up in the world, to manage, going to the bathroom and, just so we don't do things in public. I mean, we need to be socialized. We need our egos. And then how to manage not being dominated by our own egotistical ways of survival. And who talks about this is Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, I love Bruce.
The
Oh,
boss.
wise elder. He's truly a wise boss.
He's a
I
wise
love
elder, and
Bruce.
he's suffered. He's been in therapy. He's taking he's taking one of the SSRIs for depression.
Mm,
And he talks about the ways that I learned to survive. And he talks about his father kind of being a hard ass. The ways I've learned to survive have also been the ways that have limited me. So this is the ironic twist that how we've learned to survive in the world also in cage is a cage and limits what we can do. And he says that his persona on stage is his masculine, persona. It's his friend. It's what his father wanted him to be. It's this, and then underneath, he's kind of a depressed, sort of sad guy, very emotionally sensitive. And so how to not be caught by the ways that we've figured out how to survive. Because to solve the problems of the world or the problems of our relationships, we have to find ways that are outside what we've learned to do. We have to find new ways. And this is part of what the psychedelics do for us is they loosen up the neural connections so we can think more creatively and find different networks and different connections and different ways of being. And this is the challenge for us, how to find other ways of being than the ones we've developed to survive. And the ways we've developed to survive are in our bodies. You can see it, and a lot of men are reinforcing their defenses by building up an armored body.
Yes.
And so they get tougher and stronger, and it makes it even more difficult to connect. So I'm all for health and fitness and all that. And I'm not really big on armoring.
Yeah.
I don't think we need more of that. So, how to work outside in ways that are not built in from the ego. I think that's the biggest thing we face. And we are dug in egotistically. So how to get out of that cage that we built for ourselves.
Psilocybin in the water supply. No, I know that's not the solution.
We thought of that in the late 60s. And, all I can say is, look, it didn't work all that well.
It didn't work. All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. This has been a delight, and truly, I've enjoyed my time with you. And I know that this conversation will serve many people and the ripple effects.
Well, thank you for all the sharing. Again,
the book is Swimming in the Sacred. It's available at that URL, swimminginthesacred.com, as well as on Amazon. And do you have an audiobook?
There is an audiobook out. It's probably on Amazon. I haven't checked.
Okay, great. Good. All right. Thank you again, Rachel. It's been a pleasure to have you on Men This Way.
Thank you so much. Okay, take care. Good luck with your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.